What did you learn about that?
Well, that program, again, Meg uncovered that they came up with a database of about a couple hundred families that they were actively surveilling to see if they were sufficiently affirming. Kids that might have had some interaction with CPS, and they were tracking the parents, about half of which didn't even have their kids removed. They hadn't lost their parental rights or anything, but CPS was watching them and reporting back through the schools, I think, or certainly in concert with the schools, to see if the parents were sufficiently affirming enough to pass CPS muster. They thought it was a wonderful program based from a group out in California called, I think, Affirming. So these programs are embedded throughout Child Protective Services, and it's part of how you get judges and social workers and teachers and counselors all working together to save kids from the harm of not being treated as the opposite sex. Meanwhile, what actually precipitates kids into horrific harm is keeping parents out of their lives, like in Sage's case,
Right.
and certainly when they harm their bodies as well.
I know Representative Gary Click, one of really the best in the country, of course in the state of Ohio, but across the nation. And yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to have Representative Click and Klopfenstein for sponsor testimony.
But there's no more local control than Bob and Betty Buckeye.
Well, that explains why he keeps saying, well, that's not the way Representative Click does it.
I'm not supposed to get emotional, but I am.
Then we sat down with Click to discuss his bill and the controversy surrounding it.
And the chair would like to invite Representative Click to present testimony.
The question is, shall the bill pass? The chair recognizes Representative Click.
Welcome back to What's Clicking with State Representative Gary Click. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. Now, listeners, the representative has been extremely busy. Representative, you want to tell us a little bit of what's been going on? It seems like you haven't had time to remember your own name.
Well, I tell you, when you sent me the newsletter for approval today, the newsletter went out. And by the way, if anyone is not getting our newsletter, I hear a lot of people tell me we get the newsletter, we read it every week. If you're not getting it, send an email to rep88@ohiohouse.gov and say, put me on the list, and Janae will make sure you get our newsletters. But I read that, I was like, wow, I was busy last week, wasn't I? How do we get all this done for the people? And today I've been running around as well. You know, we had a special day on Wednesday for folks with developmental disabilities, and it's their advocacy day, and it's always one of my favorite days. And we have folks from the district, from the School of Hope here in Sandusky County, and the School for Opportunity down in Seneca County. And I was actually there today with them. And all those young people, well, they're people of all ages. That they made their presentations. There's young people, there's adults, and they advocate for themselves. And you can see what's going on at the School of Opportunity there in Seneca. They do a fantastic job, and I learn some things every time I go, and I just love to be an advocate for them, and of course Keith's Law and some other things that we've done. And then I had to rush from there to go up to our Rutherford B. Hayes Museum and have some conversations with them. And here was something really exciting, Janae, while I was there. They just, like today, they actually there was a place, like Historical Society in Florida, that had some pictures of one of the descendants of Hayes. I think Scott Platt Hayes, I think is who it was. And they opened a box and they found him. They said, well, we can't use this. A better place for this would be up at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library Museum up in Fremont, Ohio. And some of the Hayes families, the Hayes descendants, were in Florida at the time. They picked up the box and they brought it up here and delivered it. And they hadn't even opened it up. And so there's actually a video. I'll put a link to that maybe in the show notes here, where you could see them unboxing. And they said there's some things, there's some pictures, there's some manuscripts that they had never seen and didn't have access to before. So that's really cool. I love the Hayes. The first time I swore in out at the Hayes, and when I swear in the next time, I plan to swear in at the Hayes as well. And so it was really cool. And then while I was there, waiting for my meeting, I went to the gift shop, and then that's where you got to check in. In the gift shop, they had some. You know how in the old time, Janae, they used to You're already smiling. You don't even know what I'm going to do, what I'm going to show you here. But in the old days, I've talked about this a few times when I've gone out and given some presentations, like to Turning Point and so forth, because it was very much young people that ignited the revolution. In 1776, James Madison was 26 years old. Marquis de Lafayette was 19. I think James Monroe was 21. And Thomas Jefferson was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. But we always think they're old because we see all these people in these old white powdered wigs, and they used to wear those so that they would, today we always trying to use all this beauty cream or whatever, try to look younger, but back then they were trying to look older and more distinguished. And so in the museum they had some wigs.
I think you
What do you
just
think?
found. I
Should
think
I
you just
start
found a
wearing
new
that to
Facebook profile picture.
Yeah, should I start wearing that to session so that maybe I can get a little bit more respect? People, do I look older and more distinguished that way? I don't know.
I think
But
so. I
anyhow,
think the
I know you
speaker
get a
would
kick out of
love
that.
that.
But so that's what my day has been. Then rush home to do the what we call the intro of the next show for the podcast. And boy, do we got one today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to give us a little preview of what we'll be hearing?
So we've got a huge piece of legislation. We've hinted at, we haven't talked about it a lot, but we're going to talk about it today. And Josh Williams is my joint sponsor on this, but I've really been working on this for over a year. Something was brought to my attention by investigative journalist Megan Brock. She was with the Daily Caller at the time. Now she's with the Daily Wire. And it has to do with how some of these places, they want to call you abusive for affirming your child's sex. In other words, if you call Johnny, if you call your son a boy and your daughter a girl, oh, you might be hurting them and harming them. You're dangerous. And to the place, and it sounds crazy, but there's places, Janae, where they have literally taken children from their parents for doing just that. In fact, if you saw the State of the Union, and we're going to see that in a minute here, President Trump recognized a young lady by the name of Sage Blair and Virginia. That happened to her. That literally happened to her, and she was pulled from her parents. She was put in a boys' home because she said she was a boy. She got molested there, and you know what? I'm not going to tell the story because we're going to talk about it with Laura Hanford. And Laura Hanford has made her story very public. She wrote about it in the Federalist, and she's now at the Heritage Foundation. She has worked with me to craft this language. And then she said, asked me if we could share it with the White House. I said, of course, yes. And so the White House has actually looked at that and reviewed that language. And HHS, they issued a decision. I just heard today on the radio while I'm driving, I'm listening to the Daily Wire podcast. I hear my friend Megan Brock talking on there, and she said that they issued some guidance to say, no, you cannot take a child from their home just because the parents affirm the sex. And that's us. That's our language in 693 that is being used by the White House. And we're already having an effect nationally, but we're going to give sponsor testimony on that this week. And we're going to get this bill out. Listen, we've got to protect our families and our children. And that's why this Affirming Families First Act, HB 693, is going to be so powerful, going to make such a difference. And Laura is going to be on the program today to talk with me about that.
Well, I'm so excited. Let's jump on in.
So I am so honored today to have a special friend on What's Clickin, Laura Hanford with the Heritage Foundation. And Laura and I have been collaborating and working together on some very special projects and very special legislation that we've recently introduced in Ohio. But before we talk about that legislation, Laura, just give us a little background of who you are and what you're doing and kind of how you got started.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you remotely. Was there in person just a few weeks ago, and that was a terrific occasion. I know we'll talk about that, but my background is actually in human rights and international human rights. I grew up overseas and then ended up working overseas in post-communist Romania for our U.S. Embassy in human rights. And so my background is in human rights, and then came back and worked on Capitol Hill for several years, and ended up writing a bill with my husband on international religious freedom called the International Religious Freedom Act. So that was really kind of my background. Once we got married and I took a step back, we have 5 kids. We're in the Fairfax County public system, and that in Virginia, and that is what pulled me into reluctantly into the depredations of gender ideology on families and kids. It hit Fairfax County in about 2015, so about 11 years ago now. And then I discovered what a school board was and how to speak there and how to try to stand up to what they were doing. And just in the last few years, I've been really focused on child protection measures, particularly in Virginia with the case of a young girl named Sage from Virginia that the president, we'll get back to that, the president raised, but child protection issues related to how gender affects kids and families, and working for the Heritage Foundation.
So your experience, that's a broad range of experience, all the way from international affairs and relationships to grassroots school board activities. And so that really gives you a broad scope, doesn't it?
Yes, although you'd be surprised how much of a connection there is to authoritarian regimes the world over who separate kids from their parents so they can ensure ideological conformity. And that's exactly what is, unfortunately, what in many ways our schools have started to do, and what you see at a state level too. So I hate to say it, but there are some parallels there in what I worked on overseas.
And so Representative Josh Williams and I just recently introduced some legislation, and you were hands-on that in that process. We actually worked pretty extensively on that to make sure that our language is correct, to make sure it's right. And we just introduced that a couple of weeks ago. We had a press conference, and thank you for coming down and being a part of that press conference. And we'll put a link to that press conference in the show notes here. But I also noticed that last week, President Trump had his State of the Union address, and you were just talking about Sage. And I know when I first met you, you actually shared with me another podcast that you did more extensive than what we're doing today. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to dive deeper into that. But President Trump actually had Sage Blair at the State of the Union. And I want to just take a break and look at what he said, look at what the response was, and then come back and have you give your take on that.
And here is one more opportunity to show common sense in government. In the gallery tonight are Sage Blair and her mother, Michelle. In 2021, Sage was 14 when school officials in Virginia sought to socially transition her to a new gender, treating her as a boy and hiding it from her parents. Hard to believe, isn't it? Before long, a confused Sage ran away from home after she was found in a horrific situation in Maryland. A left-wing judge refused to return Sage to her parents because they did not immediately state that their daughter was their son. Sage was thrown into an all-boys state home and suffered terribly for a long time. But today, all of that is behind them because Sage is a proud and wonderful young woman with a full ride scholarship to Liberty University. Sage and Michelle, please stand up. And thank you for your great bravery. And who can believe that we're even speaking about things like this? 15 years ago, if somebody was up here and said that, they'd say, what's wrong with him? But now we have to say it because it's going on all over numerous states without even telling the parents. But surely we can all agree no state can be allowed to rip children from their parents' arms and transition them to a new gender against the parents' will. Who would believe that we're even talking about this? We must ban it, and we must ban it immediately. Look, nobody stands up. These people are crazy. I'm telling you, they're crazy.
So that was pretty interesting, and I was very delighted. You gave me a heads up that Sage was going to be there, and I didn't get a chance to watch it live, but I did go right back and watched that clip, especially as well as other parts of the State of the Union address. So tell me about that moment.
Yeah, that was when I found out that that was going to happen. We're close friends with Michelle. When I spent months documenting her story, and then we worked very closely together on Sage's law in Virginia, which was intended to prevent other children from going what she went through by requiring parental notification and then saying you can't define abuse to mean that you can take a child away from their family if they don't affirm them. But to see her story, I think what's really telling is that when we worked on her story originally, when Sage's Law originally, our goal was to try to help people understand what these policies do through her story. It was very courageous of her to be willing to have her mother tell it, very courageous of her mother to tell it. And a lot of families are not in a position to do that, either because they are under gag orders, or which courts, juvenile courts and family law courts are typically quite confidential for good reason. But it means that there's a lot of leeway there's a lot of helplessness that families feel when they're caught in these systems, and they're suddenly the abusers. But the families, and these judges or social workers or counselors, as they were in Sage's case, are suddenly lined up against you as a parent. And in Sage's case, that led to these horrible consequences. So I think to have the story, not only to have the story told by the President of the United States, when 5 years ago, this mother was fighting frantically to get her child back. No one would listen. No one would help. She tried and tried and tried to get an attorney. She's got a judge and a public defender who are accusing her of abuse. I mean, it just was, well, the judge entertaining those allegations as if they're real. I think there's something, you can't take away the pain. There's something healing and hopeful and redemptive about the story being told, people hearing it, hearing what really happened, and understanding that this is a terrible evil that happened, and there's a path forward to help other families who are dealing with this. So it was amazing in that sense.
And I know that we don't have the time. I know you're on a time limit today, and maybe we'll have you back a little bit later to go a little bit more in depth. But just give us the cliff notes. What happened to Sage? I mean, because the story gets worse than just her, her parents being accused of being abusive for affirming her natural sex, which is the way that we really like to frame this.
Right.
How much deeper did this go?
So her story, I think one of the reasons that the president told her story is because it is well documented, and there's a lawsuit with complaints that lay out the charges. And I mean, I wasn't part of that. Obviously, I'm speculating, but I think her what happened to her was uniquely horrible, but also it's documented. And so how the consequences of it being so bad were perhaps exceptional in her case. The story itself was not unique. So her story, basically, her mother, she started as a 14-year-old, she started a new high school in Appomattox, Virginia, which is a conservative part of Virginia, and she was trying with a friend group and trying to make friends, decided to identify as a boy, but asked the school not to tell her parents. And the school went along with that, told her to use the boys' bathroom, shifted pronouns and names and all at school. She had a history of seriously fragile mental health, and her mother had told the school this. The school ignored it. They met multiple times with Sage on her own. Sage ended up being assaulted in the bathroom that the school counselors had told her to use. But still, the school kept her mother in the dark. And it wasn't until 2 days later that she found out that Sage was identifying as a boy. She saw a hall pass fall out of her backpack, and it had a different name on it. And she asked, what is this? And Sage, well, that's me. And this is what happened. And Sage told her what happened in the bathroom. The school counselors didn't. And they'd even met with law enforcement without Sage, multiple times with Sage to talk about gender identity and transition. And this is in a space of 13 or 14 days at school, the first 13 or 14 days. Never had a conversation with her mother about it. That evening, Sage had kind of a breakdown. She ran away. And was caught in this is the worst possible nightmare. I mean, I have a daughter about that age, and it's the unthinkable. She ended up being caught by a predator, abused, trafficked across 2 state lines, disappeared, of course, from her mother didn't know she was still alive. The FBI was involved. And finally, they called her mother about 8 or 9 days later from Baltimore. And so the FBI said they found her to come get her, and her parents drove through the night to pick her up, but they were denied custody when they got there. They were told to wait 8 hours and appear before a judge, who then Sage wasn't even in the courtroom. She was appearing remotely from a cell, and a public defender was accusing them suddenly of abusing their own child in connection with misgendering. So not once did Sage receive treatment for the trauma she had been through. They put her in a boys' home for foster kids or kids that need to be in state care, which are often high risk and more kids that have a history of delinquency. They put her in a boys' home in Maryland for 2 months, and they stretched out these legal hijinks for 2 months, trying to hold on to her in Maryland and not return her. And I think almost one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the story is Sage had no idea that her mother was fighting for her. They didn't tell her that her parents had come to get her at the jail where they were holding her initially. Her mother wrote her letters, sent her gifts to the group home, telling her how much she loved her. She was frantically and successfully clearing them of abuse, because they weren't, it's not abuse to disagree with your child, but you have to jump through all the hoops. And so none of the letters ever reached her. And this prosecutor told Sage, your mother doesn't want you anymore because you're identifying as a boy. I'll find you a foster home in Maryland. So the cruelty of this after what happened to her then is just staggering. And then she ran away again, not knowing her mom wanted her back. She ran away again and again, thinking she was going to a 16-year-old that she had met online. Her counselor connected her with transgender websites, and through that, a predator was able to reach her. And so she ran away, was caught again, and disappeared for 2 months that time. And it was only Michelle scouring, for tips on social media and photographs that she found a tip that led law enforcement to find Sage in Texas. So it's every worst part of the nightmare, and of course, President Trump did the right thing to not tell the whole story like that, to have a light touch, because that was the first time Sage has ever appeared publicly to have her story told. And I think it may be the only one, but it was, it was meaningful to have the president say that. So that's a little more detail on her story, but it's every bit as horrifying. It seems unbelievable. But
And so we will link to a deeper discussion that you had with someone else on the podcast for that. It just breaks my heart. But it all started with the government coming in and saying, you're harmful to your child because you will not affirm their natural sex. We want you to affirm their confusion about their gender identity. And if they had stayed out of this, that would have never happened. But that's not just a problem in Virginia, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. It's happened across the U.S. Blue states, red states, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Virginia,
Wasn't
Maryland.
there I think of a very specific incident in Maryland that investigative journalist Megan Brock wrote about. And you want to, I know you're short on time, and I do want to get into 693 just a little bit, our House bill in Ohio, but just touch on that
Sure.
in Maryland. What happened there?
Sure. This connects to your bill in Ohio because the same program was used to train the workers in the county that took this child away from his parents, as was used in your county of Cuyahoga. So the same grant. So this child was a child who was in a conservative family, Christian family, and they brought him into Washington, D.C. for treatment because they were concerned about possible self-harm or suicide. And the hospital ended up, while he was there, they sort of reinforced. He somehow started talking about being well, they're not sure how it happened, but while he was there, they kept him on recurring suicide watches, and suddenly he was identifying as transgender, and they did not return him to his parents and banned them from. They said, if you don't stop talking about your beliefs about gender, about your beliefs from the Bible on sexuality, then he can't go back to you. And sure enough, they yanked custody from him and put him in custody of a
And they
transgender
didn't even
chaplain.
know he had these feelings, correct?
I think he had like a lot of these kids, he was troubled, but he had said that he wasn't. He went back and forth, I think, about his different
Okay.
feelings, but this wasn't something that he had expressed strongly before.
Yeah.
So, and
And they
he
came in,
had a
yeah.
history of depression and anxiety, which
And
is
he
what a
was
lot of these kids find.
autistic, is that correct?
I don't recall that detail. I would have to go back and read the story,
Okay.
but often there's a connection there.
There is. And then this comes to Ohio, and under the Biden-Harris administration, they put out a huge grant to promote this gender identity philosophy nonsense, and the Children's and Family Services program in Cuyahoga County. What did you learn about that?
Well, that program, again, Meg uncovered that they came up with a database of about a couple hundred families that they were actively surveilling to see if they were sufficiently affirming. Kids that might have had some interaction with CPS, and they were tracking the parents, about half of which didn't even have their kids removed. They hadn't lost their parental rights or anything, but CPS was watching them and reporting back through the schools, I think, or certainly in concert with the schools, to see if the parents were sufficiently affirming enough to pass CPS muster. So the Biden administration wanted to replicate that program everywhere. They thought it was a wonderful program, based from a group out in California called, I think, Affirming. So these programs are embedded throughout Child Protective Services, and it's part of how you get judges and social workers and teachers and counselors all working together to save kids from the harm of not being treated as the opposite sex. Meanwhile, what actually precipitates kids into horrific harm is keeping parents out of their lives, like in Sage's case,
Right.
and certainly when they harm their bodies as well.
And so we really want to keep the government out of the business of raising our children and making our decisions for us. And one of the things here in Ohio, as everyone in Ohio knows, I carried the SAFE Act. One of the things we did not prohibit was the parents' choice to socially affirm their children. So if they choose to do that, I don't think it's wise, but we didn't make a state law that says you cannot do that. But really what they want to do is tell us that we must do that, even in spite of the fact that the surgeries and the hormones are illegal in Ohio. They still want to tell parents that's the best practice. And and we're reclaiming the word affirm. So the name of the bill is Affirming Families First. And we're putting the families at the first and foremost of this. And we're actually talking about affirming the authentic child, which is their actual biological sex. And a couple of them have noticed that we're reclaiming their language, and they're crying about it. They're saying, "Oh, you're stealing our language." Well, what they're affirming is a confusion. What they're affirming is danger. When we have a child that has an eating disorder, we don't affirm the disorder. It's never scientifically or medically necessary to affirm a disorder. And quite honestly, they call it gender dysphoria today. Before that, it was called gender identity disorder, which is probably a more accurate term.
It's a
It is a mental
dissociative.
health disorder.
That's right.
When you think you're something you're not, that is not ordered. That is disordered. And we're not trying to be mean when we say that. There are many disorders, and people with disorders should be loved and respected. But how do you love and respect them? You help them to find the truth and to identify in a truth, and you affirm reality. You don't affirm fiction. And that's what we do in House Bill 693. And I know that our time is running out here. And so I'm going to put a lot of links in the show notes to Megan Brock's articles, to your prior podcast. And I would encourage any of our listeners or viewers that want to dig deeper on that to do that. But also pay attention to House Bill 693. My colleague Josh Williams is a joint sponsor on this. And at some point we'll have him on, but we really want y'all to be aware and to keep up with this. Any last thoughts before the clock runs out on your
Sure.
schedule, Laura?
Sure. I am. Yeah, I'm just delighted that you're running this bill because it is the most comprehensive bill in the country trying to intended to root out not just to ban the government from taking kids away from parents wrongfully or from denying foster kids placement, but also just for tackling the root of it, so that you're trying to get this training to be forbidden or not. You want good training, but you want this
Right.
poisonous part of it out. You don't want to be teaching that it's abuse to not reject a child's sex. So I'm delighted you're running it, because you were really leading the country in tackling the root causes of how this poison really spreads and affects families.
Okay. I
And
want
it's
to
a
back
very
up because I
propitious.
think you might have said that incorrectly. I think you said to not reject a child's sex.
It's abuse to not reject a child. They want you to reject a child's sex. So it's abuse not to reject it. I know it's confusing.
Yeah,
Confusing.
there's so many like double negatives and whatever. It's like what we're trying to say is that it is not abuse to affirm your child's sex
That's right.
and
It's
to
not
reject
abuse.
the confusion.
Right. It's not abuse to raise a child according to their biology, which shouldn't be even something we have to say, but it is. And I think that's where President Trump's statement yesterday was just so telling, in that moment where he said, surely we can all agree that states should not rip kids away from their families to transition them without their parents' consent. Every Democrat stayed seated, which is incredible. And that's when he just off the cuff said, these people are crazy. Nobody would have had this discussion 15 years ago. And he's right. And those are the congressional leaders. Those are the party leaders. They are heavily, heavily funded by the groups that profit off of gender transition.
And what I know, according to my research in Ohio, many of the Democrats actually agree with us on this.
Exactly. This is why rank and file people.
Not only do many of the average everyday Democrats agree with us on this, some of the legislators I know actually agree with us. Now, they won't vote that way because they've got to answer to other people besides their constituents. But they have told us off the record that, hey, yeah, we agree with you guys on those things. I'm hoping that some of them will be brave enough to step it up and to say, no, this is too much. This is too far. If you're going to call a mom and dad abusive, that's not right. And they want to frame this as anti-LGBTQ, and as though the whole thing behind LGBTQ is that we get to tell parents what to do. I don't think that, I've talked to our friend Jamie Reed, and she started a group called LGB Courage. She says, no, I stand with you guys. She says, let me know what I can do. She's gonna, she's standing with us in this, because it doesn't make you any more LGBTQ to go to a parent and say, you got to raise your kids our way or we're going to take them away. That's not how we frame that. And that's not how she wants that framed. And I know others who feel exactly the same way. I have friends and family who identify that way, and saw one of them over Christmas. They said, keep up the great work, Gary. You're doing fantastic. Keep it up. And so we're just saying, let's not take away parents' rights. And that's why it's called Affirming Families First. And the clock has run out on us, Laura. Thank you so much for carving some time out of your busy day in DC to talk about this and help bring a focus to this. And we will be in touch again, and we'll probably have you back on the podcast again with some updates on this.
Anytime. I'm happy to do anything I can to help. Thank you for taking the stand, Gary, on this one. It really, really matters. So thanks for having me on today, and good providence in all of your efforts there.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Representative, it was so incredible to hear Sage's story and to hear from Laura. Any closing thoughts on this issue?
Well, this is something we have to do. It's not something that we want to do. It's something that we have to do. And I can't, there's going to be opposition to this. There already is opposition about people mocking us and making fun of us. I don't care. Make fun of me all you want to. I'm going to protect families. Say whatever you want to. This is a priority. And to vote against this bill, to stand against this bill, what you are actually saying is that children should be removed from a good home just because a father calls his son a boy or a mother calls her daughter a girl. And that's ludicrous. People say, you're making this up. We're not making it up. We're going to prove it. We've got the facts. This is happening, and it's not going to happen in Ohio. We're putting our foot down. we're going to say no. Thank you so much to Laura Hanford for not just being on the program today, but for working with me to spearhead this legislation. And as she says, this is the most, there are others that are similar to this. Some have passed, but none of them are as comprehensive as ours. We're not, we're glad for them. We're not criticizing them. But as Laura and the Heritage Foundation have said, this is the most comprehensive language. This is the most comprehensive legislation of this type in the nation. And we will be setting precedent. We will be protecting families. And it starts right here in Ohio.
As an Ohioan, I say thank you for all that you are doing, and Representative Williams as well. Any closing thoughts before we get a preview of next week's?
Well, I don't even think we're going to give a preview for next week, Janae,
Okay.
because I think next week is just going to be you and me. That's the plan right now, and we've got so much. Next week we are just slam packed. I tell everybody that you work me like a dog. Yeah, that I work for you because you write the schedule, and you keep me hopping for sure. I will say that I will be speaking to a group about HB 646. Which passed out of committee this week, and I'm going to be talking to a local community group about that this week. And that just creates a study commission, a date for the data centers, something we have to act on. And we have made sure, there's not everybody understands everything about it, but we have made sure that includes the appropriate people, including farmers. Farmers are important. Actually, this is the number 2 thing on there. First, people with knowledge of data centers, and then it's people with knowledge of agriculture. People in every aspect of this, so that we get a very holistic view and understanding, and what are the best practices, what's fact, what's fiction, and we want to sort that out so that Ohio can move forward and that everyone has their voices heard. We'll be talking about that, but we've got 7 pieces of legislation moving. That's incredible.
Yeah.
In 1 week, and 4 of those are sponsor testimony. Some of them are at the same time. It's like, you got to be here. You got to run over to the Senate or run from the Senate back to the House and back and forth to give the sponsor testimony. Every bill starts with sponsor testimony. We'll still be giving sponsor testimony on HB 693, the Affirming Families First Act. Then I'll be giving sponsor testimony in the Senate on the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act. I'll be giving sponsor testimony in the Senate on the My Child, My Chart Act. Both of those passed through the House, and that just makes sure that parents have access to their children's online medical records. And we'll be giving on 393, I think, dealing with racetracks in Ohio is a great industry. The America First Act which just really protects our nation when it comes to immigration on a state level. Very common sense legislation. That's HB 200. That's going to be having proponent testimony this week. And I think I left something out. I can't keep up with all of it, but we've got it all written out. What did I miss? Did I miss anything?
393 is the Brewer bill on the correction facilities.
Yes. Okay.
And then we have the racetrack bill, HB 639.
Okay.
Yeah,
We got too many
gonna be a
6s, 9s, and
lot. I
10s.
know. I'm having to memorize the titles just to get
so we
the
got
bill
racetrack
numbers.
bill, that bill. What else? What bill are we hearing that I didn't mention?
Let's see. Charlie Kirk, racetrack, AFA.
We'll figure it out.
Man, I'm blanking. We've got so many, I can't keep track of them all.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, and that's what happens. When you've had some time and experience in the legislature, you know how to move these things, to get these things done, and to keep the ball rolling. And that's a sign of experience. And we're going to get these things done. And so what we're going to do next week, rather than have a guest, we're just going to call it the highlight reel. And we're just going to say, let's hear all the highlights from the week. Here's where we were, what we did, what it looked like. And we may have a few clips along the way. I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. But next week, we're going to give you a report on everything that happens. Oh, and by the way, in the middle of all that is the governor's last State of the State address on Wednesday as well. So it'll be interesting to see what his vision is for his final year. So anyway, that's where we're at. We probably let people go, and we will see you all next time on What's Clickin'.
You've been listening to What's Clickin', the official podcast of State Representative Gary Click, covering Ohio's 88th House District. That includes Seneca and Sandusky counties in Northwest Ohio. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. If you would like to reach out to us, you can send us an email at rep88, that's REP88, at ohiohouse.gov, or you can give us a call at 614-466-1374. Thanks again for joining us for What's Clickin' with State Representative Gary Click. We'll be back again soon to let you know what's clickin' in Ohio.